They thought they could bully me off my own ranch. The HOA showed up with fines, threats, and eviction notices, but what they didn't know was that I not only owned the land they were standing on, I owned their precious HOA office too. And when the truth came out, their entire operation came crashing down. Before I tell you how I turned the tables, make sure you stick around, because this story gets crazier than you can imagine. But first, if you love stories where the underdog wins against greedy HOAs and power-tripping neighbors, hit that like button, subscribe, and let's get into it. It all started on a quiet spring morning when I noticed a new sign at the entrance of the road leading to my ranch. It read, "Private community property, HOA rules apply." I nearly laughed. My ranch had been in my family for decades, a massive spread of open pasture, stables, and an old barn sitting on more than 200 acres of land. I had no neighbors within half a mile, and certainly no HOA had ever been established here. But apparently, a new housing development had gone up about 2 miles down the road, and their homeowners association had decided to extend its jurisdiction farther than it should have. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I figured some overzealous board member must have put the sign up without realizing this was private property, not tied to their community. But a few days later, a letter arrived in the mail, an official HOA notice demanding payment for community maintenance fees. It was laughable. They wanted $350 a month for landscaping, streetlights, and pool maintenance, things I didn't even have. I ignored the letter, but they didn't stop. The following week, another notice appeared, this time citing me for unauthorized structures. Apparently, my barn didn't fit the aesthetic guidelines. They even included a threat of fines and further enforcement. That's when I realized this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. They were targeting me. A week later, I woke up to find 2 HOA board members parked at the end of my driveway, clipboard in hand, taking pictures of my property. They didn't even bother to ask permission. I walked down to confront them, but before I could even speak, one of them smirked and said, "We've already submitted violations for this place. Expect an official visit soon." My blood boiled. I decided right then that I wasn't going to let these people push me around. I called the county office to verify property boundaries. Sure enough, my ranch sat completely outside the HOA's jurisdiction. I even owned the small parcel of land that their subdivision's access road crossed. That meant they were technically using my property every single day. The irony was almost too perfect. Still, I wanted to see how far they'd go. So I played along. I let the next few weeks roll by, collecting every letter, every fine, every fake notice they sent me. I kept records, photos, timestamps, everything. By the end of the month, they'd racked up nearly $4,000 in fees. The final straw came when they taped an eviction notice to my gate, claiming I had 72 hours to vacate. That's when I decided it was time to end the game. I scheduled a meeting with the HOA's president, a smug man named Greg who believed he ran the entire neighborhood like a miniature empire. I pretended to be cooperative, acting as though I wanted to settle the dispute. He invited me to their monthly meeting, held in a small office building near the development's clubhouse. When I arrived, everyone turned to stare, whispering like I was some kind of outsider. The air was thick with arrogance. Greg started the meeting by listing off my violations: unapproved fencing, excessive land use, improper signage. I stayed quiet, letting him ramble on, stacking papers in front of me like he was preparing for a courtroom showdown. When he finally finished, I calmly asked if he was sure about everything he'd said. "Absolutely," he replied, "and if you don't comply, we'll pursue legal action." That's when I dropped the first bombshell. I slid a property deed across the table. It showed my ownership not only of my ranch, but also of the very plot their HOA office sat on. Their faces went pale. You could hear the air conditioner hum louder than anyone breathing. I explained how decades ago the land had been subdivided incorrectly, leaving the small office lot still part of my family's holdings. When the HOA was established, they must have assumed it was theirs, but they'd never verified. "Technically," I said, "you're squatting on my property." Greg tried to argue, but I had documentation from the county clerk to prove it. The silence in that room was golden. I didn't stop there. I handed out copies of the boundary maps showing that my entire ranch sat outside their jurisdiction, meaning every fine, every notice, every so-called violation they'd issued was legally worthless. But I wasn't finished. I told them I'd contacted a lawyer who specialized in land disputes, and unless they ceased all contact immediately, I'd pursue damages for harassment and trespassing. Greg turned red, muttering that they'd look into it. The next day, the signs at my road disappeared. But what came next was even better. A week after the confrontation, I got a knock on my door from a local contractor who handled repairs for the HOA. He said Greg had ordered emergency maintenance for the HOA office but couldn't pay the invoice because the property's title was suddenly in question. Apparently, county officials had frozen the HOA's accounts until ownership was verified. I almost laughed out loud. Their entire operation was grinding to a halt because they had been running it on land they didn't own. Over the next few weeks, things spiraled. Residents started complaining that their HOA fees weren't being used, common areas were unmaintained, and rumors spread that the board was corrupt. Eventually, someone leaked the story about how they'd tried to evict me and how I actually owned their office building. The local newspaper picked it up. Then a regional news station ran the headline, "HOA targets landowner. Turns out he owns their property." The outrage was immediate. Homeowners demanded resignations, and Greg's smug face disappeared from every meeting notice after that. Within a month, the entire board had stepped down. A new interim group tried to rebuild trust, but it was too late. Most residents voted to dissolve the HOA completely. In the end, I sold them back the office lot for triple its appraised value. And just to make sure they remembered their lesson, I added a clause to the deed restricting any future community management organizations from ever claiming authority over my land again. It was poetic justice. They thought they could bully the rancher on the hill. Instead, they ended up paying him. As I watched their old office being cleared out, I couldn't help but smile. Some battles aren't fought with fists or fury. They're won with patience, paperwork, and a little poetic revenge. Months later, life on the ranch returned to peace. The sound of cows lowing replaced the arguments and phone calls that once filled my days. But the whole ordeal had made me more aware of how powerful HOAs could be when left unchecked. I started helping other property owners in the county understand their rights. Many didn't realize that HOAs often overstepped boundaries, sometimes literally. People began reaching out for advice on handling fines, disputes, or unfair treatment. I never charged a dime. I told them all the same thing: know what you own and stand your ground. Word spread, and soon I was invited to speak at a local property owners association meeting, not an HOA, but a group dedicated to protecting rural land rights. Standing there, looking at a room full of farmers, ranchers, and homeowners, I realized how many people had been quietly bullied by systems meant to maintain order. They just needed one story to remind them they had power too. The county commissioner even thanked me for bringing attention to the issue. It turned out several HOAs were built on shaky legal ground, with outdated or incomplete zoning filings. The county began auditing them, forcing compliance with real property boundaries, all because one stubborn rancher refused to roll over. That day, I finally felt the weight lift off my shoulders. The ranch was more than land, it was legacy, and I'd defended it the way my grandfather would have wanted. A year later, the land looked better than ever. I restored the barn, fixed the fences, and added a new sign at the front gate that read, "Private property, respect boundaries." Every time I saw it, I smiled. Occasionally, I'd still get mail addressed to the HOA office, delivered by mistake. I'd toss it in the burn barrel with the rest of the junk. Once, Greg himself drove by, his car slowing as he passed the ranch. I don't know if he recognized me standing on the porch, but I sure recognized that defeated look. The HOA world had moved on, but the story had stuck around. It became a bit of local legend, the rancher who owned the HOA's land. Reporters still reached out occasionally, wanting follow-ups, but I preferred to keep quiet. My victory wasn't about fame. It was about peace, respect, and proving that no self-appointed authority could take what wasn't theirs. Sometimes, when the sun set over the fields, I'd think about how close they came to stealing it all. But then I'd remember the moment I placed that deed on the table, the silence, the shock, and I'd know I'd done right by my family's name. The ranch stood strong and unshaken, a testament to standing your ground when everyone else tells you to move. And if anyone else ever tries to pull something like that again, well, I still have copies of every single letter they sent. So if you enjoyed this story of justice served to the overreaching HOA, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more wild property drama stories, and share this video with someone who loves seeing karma catch up to the power-hungry. Thanks for watching, and remember, always know what's yours and never let anyone take it away.